One of the great privileges of being a superintendent with a school district is that you get to witness the miracle of learning happening right before your eyes. Recently, I visited a kindergarten classroom, and there were 4 children seated at a tiny conference table with their teacher. So I looked over and I said, "Wow, this looks fascinating. What's going on here?" A little guy looked at me. He said, "It is fascinating. Why don't you come and join me?" So there's one in every crowd, isn't there? So I wandered over and I folded myself into the seat. And I said to the teacher, I said, "Well, what's going on?" She said, "Well, look over there," she said, "behind you." So I did. And there was a chart on the wall, and the 2 words on it were Wonderwall. She said, when the children become interested in something, become curious about something, they go over and they jot it down on the Wonderwall. And then we see if any of the other children are interested, and then we develop the learning activities from there. I said, "But how do you know what they're interested in? It's indecipherable hieroglyphics." She said, "Not at all. That's because you're a superintendent and you can't read very well." "Let me read to you," she said. The Wonderwall. How does the human body work? That was question 1. The second question, unfolding from that question, was, how do eyes stay in my head? And the third question, which is the age-old question that we've all been pondering since we were 4 years old, how does skin stay on my body? And then there's a little smiley face. So anyway, the children, obviously one of the children had become interested in the human body, and the teacher said, and these other children around the table, they too were fascinated by the human body. So you're now sitting with the kindergarten expert panel on the human body. I said, "Really?" She said, "Yes, really." On the table in front of the children, there was a chart, and it was in 3 columns. And the first column was a series of pictures of different parts of the human body. The third column was vocabulary associated with those different body parts. And the center was blank. And the idea was that the children would have conversations and dialogue around the different parts of the body, where they were in the body, the function. And they learned, and then they documented their learning in the center column. So I said, "Well, show me this in action." So she pointed to a picture, at the top picture of the intestines. Now, actually, it was an awful picture of I thought it was a golf ball, but that's me. Anyway, and I mentioned this to the teacher, but I'm just joking. Anyway, she said to the little guy, she said to one of the little boys, she said, can you tell us what that is?" And he was a bit of a drama guy. He was tapping his forehead, scratching his head, and he looked up at me, and he pointed at me quite aggressively. He said, "I used to know this, you know." I said, "I'm sure you did." Anyway, the teacher took the conversation off in another direction, but suddenly the little guy said, "Oh, I've remembered. I know what it is." She said, "What is it?" He said, "It's the intesticles." Well, I don't know what we'd expected as an answer. That definitely was not it, but let me assure you, it is an answer that we will never forget. But the point is, the Wonderwall. What a beautiful concept. It's a strategy that we use in our kindergarten classrooms across the district. But I think it has possibilities way beyond kindergarten. Actually, way beyond schools. This is Tony Hsieh. Some of you may recognize him. More to the point, your shoes might recognize him. When Tony Hsieh was 24, he sold his first startup company to Microsoft for the paltry sum of $240 million US. Now, I knew some of you would be interested, so I worked it out last night. That's $1 billion Canadian, okay? Now, Tony went on to spend much of that fortune and many years salvaging an online shoe company that he'd invested in called Zappos. He was eventually successful in that regard. He brought it from the brink of bankruptcy to a $1.2 billion acquisition by Amazon. But for me, The fascinating part of this story is the story behind the story. And Tony Hsieh reveals this. He tells the story of the journey in this book, Delivering Happiness. What an unusual title for a business book, don't you think? But in it, he reveals his belief that the success of an organization is entirely related to the culture that you develop within that organization. If you can get the culture right, everything else will fall more naturally in place. And Tony Hsieh's belief is that a successful organization is intricately connected to the happiness and the well-being of the people within that organization. One day in 2003, Tony got together with a group of his colleagues from Zappos, and they spent some time sharing personal perspectives about what it was about this remarkable organization that was so profoundly meaningful to them, so personally meaningful. And he was so moved by what he heard that day that he decided he wanted to share this opportunity with all of the Zappos family, as they refer to themselves, all of the employees. And so was born the idea of the Zappos Culture Book, what I think of as Tony Hsieh's Wonder Wall. This book is published annually, and it's sold around the world to hundreds of thousands of people. Business people, ordinary people, organizations who are trying to get a glimpse into this remarkable culture, which is founded on the happiness and well-being of the people within it. This is Zita Cobb. At the height of the dot-com boom, Zita Cobb was the third highest paid female executive in North America. When she finally left JDS Uniphase in Ottawa, she did so a very wealthy lady, and she spent many years sailing around the world. I don't blame her. I'd do exactly the same thing, as unlikely as that is. Eventually, however, she felt the strong desire, like so many of her kin, to return to her home, the home of her childhood, Fogo Island, Newfoundland. Zita had returned to Fogo many, many times over the course of the years. She'd grown up there in poverty, actually, with her 6 siblings, in a 900-square-foot house with no electricity and no running water. And when the cod fishery collapsed, she watched her dad, who had been pretty well broken by this experience, set fire to his boat and moved the family back to the mainland of Newfoundland. Zita had returned many, many times over the years, but with each return visit, she felt an increasing desire to do something to help the island. One day, she went for a jog around the coastline, and her run took her past derelict homes and tiny, tiny outports long since abandoned. And she thought to herself, you know, sometimes you don't know what you've got until you don't have it anymore. So she set on a personal mission to do what she could to save Fogo Island. And she established the Shorefast Foundation. A shorefast is the line that tethers the cod trap to the shore. But for Zita Cobb, it was much more than that. It became a metaphor to symbolize how community and culture are so firmly embedded in place of origin. A vision of practical planning and social engagement to spark a cultural and economic renaissance. I see this as Zita Cobb's Wonder Wall. There were 3 original goals for Shorefast. The first was to reinvigorate the traditional economy of the island based around the fishery and the crafts. The second was absolutely audacious. It was to make Fogo Island, Newfoundland, an international center for world-class art. And the third was to build and operate a 29-room luxury hotel, the profits from which would go in to fund the renewal projects. So today, Fogo Island Newfoundland is an international destination for travelers. People come from all around the world to bear witness to these remarkable renewal projects, not the least of which is the Artist in Residence program, featuring artist studios all around the island. And of course, the 29-room Fogo Island Inn. The furnishings of which are built by the craftspeople of the island. So, a kindergarten classroom, an online shoe store, and a rural renewal project on an island in the Atlantic. 3 very different stories, but for me, so deeply connected. If you want to make the extraordinary happen, do something really meaningful in your organization, then you have to foster a culture of engagement and creativity and belonging. And what you have to do is to recognize and cherish the remarkable natural creativity that lies within everybody within that organization, whether they're 4 or 104. For me, the metaphor of the wonder wall weaves through each of these stories. In the kindergarten classroom, it's the valuing of the natural curiosity, the natural creativity that lies within every one of those children. At Zappos, it's the valuing of the employee's desire to live in a family-like atmosphere of happiness and well-being. And with the Shorefast Foundation, it's the valuing and the deep understanding of the connection between community, culture, and place. And in valuing these things in such special and significant and unique ways, you see how possible it is to make a positive impact not only on those around you, but in the greater society. For me, then, the metaphor of the wonder wall is powerful indeed. And as we live in this incredible age of complexity, it's increasingly imperative that all of us do whatever we can to make positive impact on those around us. So I'd just like to leave with 2 questions. What are you doing to make the extraordinary happen? And ultimately, what's your wonder wall? Thank you.